According to the literature on reality monitoring, stories based on imagined experiences are qualitatively different from those based on real experiences. This suggests that creating a false story about a personal topic takes work and results in a different pattern of language use. A technology known as linguistic text analysis has helped to identify 4 such common patterns in the subconscious language of deception. First, liars reference themselves less when making deceptive statements. They write or talk more about others, often using the third person to distance and disassociate themselves from their lie, which sounds more false. Absolutely no party took place at this house, or, I didn't host a party here. Second, liars tend to be more negative, because on a subconscious level, they feel guilty about lying. For example, a liar might say something like, "Sorry, my stupid phone battery died. I hate that thing." Third, liars typically explain events in simple terms since our brains struggle to build a complex lie. Judgment and evaluation are complex things for our brains to compute. As a U.S. president once famously insisted, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." And finally, even though liars keep descriptions simple, they tend to use longer and more convoluted sentence structure, inserting unnecessary words and irrelevant but factual-sounding details in order to pad the lie. Work comes to be the center around which the world turns. Human beings start to see themselves chiefly as workers, and the entirety of life becomes more and more work, or work-like. To see this, we can begin to examine a number of what I might call tightening conditions. So the first condition would be the centrality of work. We've come to think that work is actually the center and everything else begins to turn around it. That we are preparing for work. That we are preparing to leave work. And this is happening all the way around the world. Meanwhile, we're adjusting our schedules, the rest of our lives, so that they are turning about it. So that would be the first condition. The second condition is subordination. That everything else in life comes to seem as if it's subordinate to, and to be put in the service of, work. We can think of sleeping. The idea is that we wish to sleep well today in order to be focused and prepared for work. And that when we're at work, we wish to be as productive as possible. So sleep becomes that which is an instrument in the service of productivity. And we can play that game with all sorts of different instances. The third condition is the resemblance claim. It seems as if everything else in life comes to resemble work, more and more. So you can think of, on a day off you are wanting to be as productive as possible, thinking about how much you got done. You can begin to think about all the ways in which you plan and schedule time with children. The terms that begin to mark out our lives even when we're not actually working sound more and more work-like. And the last condition, I think, is the most intense, and that's what I might call cultural forgetfulness. We've come to almost forget that there was a time in which work was not the center of the world, that there are other ways of life that precede the modern world, in which work was a part of life but was not the focus of life. We forget that that's still true today with other cultures, some other cultures. And we forget that there could actually be a time when work would not be that around which the rest of the world turns. Why are there so many jobs? There are actually 2 fundamental economic principles at stake. One has to do with human genius and creativity. The other has to do with human insatiability, or greed, if you like. I'm going to call the first of these the O-ring principle, and it determines the type of work that we do. The second principle is the never get enough principle, and it determines how many jobs there actually are. Let's start with the O-ring. ATMs, automated teller machines, had 2 countervailing effects on bank teller employment. As you would expect, they replaced a lot of teller tasks. The number of tellers per branch fell by about a third. But banks quickly discovered that it also was cheaper to open new branches, and the number of bank branches increased by about 40% in the same time period. The net result was more branches and more tellers. But those tellers were doing somewhat different work. As their routine, cash handling tasks receded, they became less like checkout clerks and more like salespeople, forging relationships with customers, solving problems and introducing them to new products like credit cards, loans and investments. More tellers doing a more cognitively demanding job. There's a general principle here. Most of the work that we do requires a multiplicity of skills, and brains and brawn, technical expertise and intuitive mastery, perspiration and inspiration in the words of Thomas Edison. In general, automating some subset of those tasks doesn't make the other ones unnecessary. In fact, it makes them more important. It increases their economic value. The public realm in America has two roles. It is the dwelling place of our civilization and our civic life, and it is the physical manifestation of the common good. And when you degrade the public realm, you will automatically degrade the quality of your civic life and the character of all the enactments of your public life and communal life that take place there. The public realm comes mostly in the form of the street in America because we don't have the 1,000-year-old cathedral plazas and market squares of older cultures. And your ability to define space and to create places that are worth caring about all comes from a body of culture that we call the culture of civic design. This is a body of knowledge, method, skill and principle that we threw in the garbage after World War II and decided we don't need that anymore, we're not going to use it. And consequently, we can see the result all around us. The public realm has to inform us not only where we are geographically, but it has to inform us where we are in our culture. Where we've come from, what kind of people we are, and it needs to, by doing that, it needs to afford us a glimpse to where we're going in order to allow us to dwell in a hopeful present. The comic move is to guide us to a benevolent conception of people, and hence, parts of ourselves. Comedy also does a great job at reducing power imbalances. It's hugely reassuring to see the powerful laughing at themselves. Finding oneself comical is a token of maturity. It means being able to see one's faults without being too defensive about it. Humor often provides a mechanism whereby the powerless, or at least, the less powerful, can give constructive but pointed feedback to the powerful. Monty Python was particularly focused on this task. The Philosopher's Football Match mocks the great figures of intellectual history. It's funny because we've been intimidated so deeply in the past by intellectual bullies, we made us feel small with our reading of Wittgenstein or Schopenhauer. And now they're shown as being completely rubbish at football, and yet seriously involved in the game. Comedy isn't just a bit of fun. The comic perspective is a central need of a society. It enables us to cope much better with our own follies and disappointments, our troubles around work and love, and our difficulties in enduring ourselves. Comedy is waiting to be reframed as a central tool in a better society. We can fertilize our food. Each one of us is pooping and peeing something that could fertilize half or maybe all of our food, depending on our diet. That dark brown poo in the toilet is dark brown because of what? Dead stuff, bacteria. That's carbon. And carbon, if we're getting that into the soil, is going to bind to the other minerals and nutrients in there. Boom. Healthier food. Voila. Healthier people. Chemical fertilizers by definition don't have carbon in them. Imagine if we could move our animal manure and our human manure to our soil. We might not need to rely on fossil fuel-based fertilizers, mine minerals from far away. Imagine how much energy we could save. Now, some of us are concerned about industrial pollutants contaminating this reuse cycle. That can be addressed. But we need to separate our discomfort about talking about poo and pee so we can calmly talk about how we want to reuse it and what things we don't want to reuse. And get this, if we change our approach to sanitation, we can start to slow down climate change. Remember that carbon in the poop? If we can get that into our soil bank, it's going to start to absorb carbon dioxide that we put into the air. And that could help slow down global warming. Our society is just more and more mobile. Everything is on the move. I mean, the good part, it's convenient. You can drink coffee anywhere. You don't have the stay in the dinner. It can be in the subway. You can be walking. The bad part is it's harder to savor a coffee when you're taking it on the road. The first patent for a lid on a cup was in 1934, but it was for cold beverages, and in 1950 this guy named James Reifsnyder invented the first snap-on lid, but it didn't have an opening for drinking. In the 60s there was this huge cultural shift where people started drinking coffee on the move, and 7-Eleven was the first to sell coffee to go. And then came this revolution. In 1967, a man named Alan Frank invented a lid that you could peel a tab off, like in the shape of a guitar pick, and drink it from there. In 1975, another big advance, you could peel back a tab and attach it to the lid itself. So more and more people started drinking coffee on the go. In 1984, a watershed moment in the history of coffee cup lids, the birth of the traveler lid, and it is iconic. You've seen it a million times, and it solved a whole host of problems. It's designed so that you don't splash your face, because it's higher than any of the other ones. It's got this protruding rim, so it slightly cools the coffee before it hits your lips. It's got a small depression in the center for your nose, so you can really get in there and get maximum aroma. It's got this tiny air hole that lets the steam out and stops it from creating a vacuum. This is one of those objects where you just don't notice it until it dribbles on your lap, so I think the coffee cup lid will just continue to evolve, and you're gonna see a move away from single-use plastic lids to lids that are a little more sustainable. How are we raising our children? Are we raising them for now instead of yet? Are we raising kids who are obsessed with getting A's? Are we raising kids who don't know how to dream big dreams? Their biggest goal is getting the next A, or the next test score. And are they carrying this need for constant validation with them into their future lives? Maybe, because employers are coming to me and saying, we have already raised a generation of young workers who can't get through the day without an award. So what can we do? How can we build that bridge to yet? Here are some things we can do. First of all, we can praise wisely, not praising intelligence or talent. That has failed. Don't do that anymore. But praising the process that kids engage in, their effort, their strategies, their focus, their perseverance, their improvement. This process praise creates kids who are hardy and resilient. There are other ways to reward yet. We recently teamed up with game scientists from the University of Washington to create a new online math game that rewarded yet. In this game, students were rewarded for effort, strategy and progress. The usual math game rewards you for getting answers right now, but this game rewarded process. And we got more effort, more strategies, more engagement over longer periods of time, and more perseverance when they hit really, really hard problems. Just the words, yet, or, not yet, we're finding, give kids greater confidence. Give them a path into the future that creates greater persistence. And we can actually change students' mindsets. I kept thinking, why does the item have to be returned to the retailer in the first place? What if there was another way, a win-win for everyone? What if when a person is trying to return something, it could go to the next shopper who wants it, and not the retailer? What if, instead of a return, they could do what I call a green turn? Consumers could use an app to take pictures of the item and verify the condition while returning it. Artificial intelligence systems could then sort these clothes by condition, mint condition or slightly used, and direct it to the next appropriate person. Mint condition clothes could automatically go to the next buyer, while slightly used clothes could be marked down and offered online again. The retailer can decide the business rules on the number of times a particular item can be resold. All that the consumer would need to do is obtain a mobile code, take it to the nearest shipping place to be packed and shipped, and off it goes from one buyer to the next, not the landfill. Now you will ask, would people really go through all this trouble? I think they would if they had incentives, like loyalty points or cashback. Let's call it green cash. There would be a whole new opportunity to make money from this new customer base looking to buy these returns. This system would make a fun thing like shopping a spiritual experience that helps save our planet. Now typically, when we think about business, we use what I call mechanical thinking. We set goals, we analyze problems, we construct and we adhere to plans, and more than anything else, we stress efficiency and short-term performance. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a splendidly practical and effective way of addressing relatively simple challenges in relatively stable environments. It's the way that Bob, and probably many of us, myself included, process most business problems we're faced with every day. In fact, it was a pretty good mental model for business, overall, until about the mid-1980s, when the conjunction of globalization and a revolution in technology and telecommunications made business far more dynamic and unpredictable. But what about those more dynamic and unpredictable situations that we now increasingly face? I think in addition to the mechanical thinking, we now need to master the art of biological thinking, as embodied by our 6 principles. In other words, we need to think more modestly and subtly about when and how we can shape, rather than control, unpredictable and complex situations. Unlike the Moon, our dead, rocky companion, the Earth is alive, pulsing with creative and destructive forces that power its geological metabolism. Lunar rocks brought back by the Apollo astronauts all date back to about the age of the Solar System. Moon rocks are forever. Earth rocks, on the other hand, face the perils of a living lithosphere. All will suffer ruination, through some combination of mutilation, compression, folding, tearing, scorching and baking. Thus, the volumes of Earth history are incomplete and disheveled. The library is vast and magnificent, but decrepit. And it was this tattered complexity in the rock record that obscured its meaning until relatively recently. Nature provided no card catalog for geologists, this would have to be invented. 5,000 years after the Sumerians learned to record their thoughts on clay tablets, the Earth's volumes remained inscrutable to humans. We were geologically illiterate, unaware of the antiquity of our own planet and ignorant of our connection to deep time. It wasn't until the turn of the 19th century that our blinders were removed. We know from history that every major industrial disruption has followed the same shape and exponential curve, with new technologies being adopted very slowly at first, but then a doubling rate kicking in consistently until the overall transformation happens very quickly in the end. It's a movie we've seen many times before, whether from horses to cars, from valves to transistors, or landlines to mobile phones. And we understand how it works. Initially, the cost of technology is high, but as we learn through volume adoption, the cost goes down and adoption goes up. Best example right now would be electric batteries, consistently coming down in cost by 20% a year for the last 10 years. And as the volume of adoption grows, especially with electric vehicle sales growing, we can be confident that the costs of that technology will continue to go down, driving that exponential growth. We set these exponential goals because we believe in the power of human innovation. Engineers love these goals. They stretch targets. It's what they live for. First, let's talk about how smell works. From coffee to stinky trash, the substances around us give off volatiles, which you can think of as tiny smell molecules. We breathe in these smell molecules, which then stimulate the olfactory sensory neurons that sit high in the nose. Each of these neurons contains an odor receptor on its surface. Once the odor receptors are triggered by these smell molecules, the neurons send information about them to the brain. Here's what I think is so cool. The brain not only categorizes that information as a particular odor, it may also begin to associate feelings like pleasure or disgust and other moods and emotions with that odor for future reference. For example, you sniff bacon. You eat it. Your taste buds get salt, and then your body gets a whack of fat, which is an energy source. So the brain loves it and attaches a positive label to it. The next time you smell bacon, a sensation associated with pleasure arises. This phenomenon of conservation is explained by what we call the first law of thermodynamics, sometimes referred to as the law of energy conservation. The law states, energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy can be described as the ability to do work, where work is the movement of matter when a force is applied to it. A closed system is a system in which no matter or energy is allowed to enter or leave. The first law of thermodynamics tells us that the amount of energy within an ecosystem is constant. It doesn't change. An open system, on the other hand, allows stuff to come in and go out. Since most systems are not closed, the laws of energy conservation can be rephrased to say that the change in the internal energy of the system is equal to the difference between the amount of energy coming in, minus the amount of energy going out. In other words, the amount of energy in the system can change but only if it comes from another system or goes to another system. At any rate, systems, whether they're open or closed, do not create or destroy energy. Rather, energy can enter from one system and leave to another. Cartoonists are like sponges. They soak up people, places, mannerisms, clothing, and behavior. Sometimes they might jot them down in a little black book that they carry around with them. Other times, it is just soaked up into the cartoonist's brain only to be squeezed out later when she is sitting at her drawing table. Not only does a cartoonist have to be aware of what she is seeing visually, but she has to listen to herself think. In other words, take the incoming information and select it, shape it, and then use it for a cartoon. Now that you have an idea, or something you think could be good for a cartoon, it's time to shape it. A cartoon is like a staged play. A cartoonist is playwright, director, stage designer, choreographer, and costume designer. A cartoon has characters, a set, dialogue, even if one line, and a backstory. The characters must be dressed to fit the idea, speak in a way that is natural and forwards the idea or gives the punchline. Nothing should be in the cartoon that is not absolutely necessary for the advancement of the idea. The image and words have to dance together in a way that makes sense. It could be a graceful dance, or an awkward dance, if that is part of the humor or idea. And then the execution. Some cartoonists sketch the idea with pencil then ink it with pen using a lightbox. Others visualize the image in their head and draw directly on the paper in pen. And as Great Britain grew, interest in tea spread around the world. By 1700, tea in Europe sold for 10 times the price of coffee and the plant was still only grown in China. The tea trade was so lucrative that the world's fastest sailboat, the clipper ship, was born out of intense competition between Western trading companies. All were racing to bring their tea back to Europe first to maximize their profits. At first, Britain paid for all this Chinese tea with silver. When that proved too expensive, they suggested trading tea for another substance, opium. This triggered a public health problem within China as people became addicted to the drug. Then in 1839, a Chinese official ordered his men to destroy massive British shipments of opium as a statement against Britain's influence over China. This act triggered the First Opium War between the two nations. Fighting raged up and down the Chinese coast until 1842 when the defeated Qing dynasty ceded the port of Hong Kong to the British and resumed trading on unfavorable terms. The war weakened China's global standing for over a century. At some point in your life, maybe even now, you might wonder whether freelancing is right for you. You'll need a few things to be successful. First, you'll need a skill that's in demand. This can be as universal as driving a car to as specialized as neurosurgery, and it can be in pretty much any field. The more people who want your skill, and the fewer people who have it, the more you can charge for your services. Next, you'll need to transform yourself into an entrepreneur. Before freelancers can do any work, they have to find it. That takes marketing your services, negotiating contracts, building a network of satisfied clients, and a whole set of administrative skills like project management, time management, and accounting. And thirdly, if you can afford it, it's probably a good idea to budget for some benefits for yourself and maybe your family. Freelancers don't automatically get perks that some salaried jobs offer, like paid vacation or sick leave, life insurance, college tuition, or retirement plans. Parties have become synonymous with sociability because of certain underlying ideas about what true social connection might require and entail. We assume that sociability naturally springs up when lots of people are put together in a room, that it means speaking a lot and notably cheerfully about things that have been happening in our lives, that it depends on a jokey manner and ideally on the possession of a few entertaining anecdotes, often involving striking coincidences. But such assumptions sidestep two sizable objections. Firstly, true sociability that is a real connection between two people is almost never built up via anything cheerful. It is the result of making ourselves vulnerable before another person, by revealing some of what is broken, lost, confused, lonely and in pain within us. We build genuine connections when we dare to exchange thoughts that might leave us open to humiliation and judgment. We make real friends through sharing in an uncensored and frank way a little of the agony and confusion of being alive. Secondly, true sociability requires a context. We are generally under such pressure to appear normal, self-possessed and solid, we are understandably uninclined spontaneously to disclose our true selves. Our default mode is without anything sinister being meant by this to lie about who we are and what is really going on in our lives. This suggests that a genuinely social occasion might be rather different from what we typically envisage. There are many theories that attempt to quantify the number of hours, days, and even years of practice that it takes to master a skill. While we don't yet have a magic number, we do know that mastery isn't simply about the amount of hours of practice. It's also the quality and effectiveness of that practice. Effective practice is consistent, intensely focused, and targets content or weaknesses that lie at the edge of one's current abilities. So if effective practice is the key, how can we get the most out of our practice time? Try these tips. Focus on the task at hand. Minimize potential distractions by turning off the computer or TV and putting your cell phone on airplane mode. In one study, researchers observed 260 students studying. On average, those students were able to stay on task for only 6 minutes at a time. Laptops, smartphones, and particularly Facebook were the root of most distractions. Start out slowly or in slow motion. Coordination is built with repetitions, whether correct or incorrect. If you gradually increase the speed of the quality repetitions, you have a better chance of doing them correctly. Next, frequent repetitions with allotted breaks are common practice habits of elite performers. Studies have shown that many top athletes, musicians, and dancers spend 50 to 60 hours per week on activities related to their craft. Many divide their time used for effective practice into multiple daily practice sessions of limited duration. And finally, practice in your brain in vivid detail. The sensation of fullness is set in motion as food moves from your mouth down your esophagus. Once it hits your stomach, it gradually fills the space. That causes the surrounding muscular wall to stretch, expanding slowly like a balloon. A multitude of nerves wrapped intricately around the stomach wall sense the stretching. They communicate with the vagus nerve up to the brainstem and hypothalamus, the main parts of the brain that control food intake. But that's just one input your brain uses to sense fullness. After all, if you fill your stomach with water, you won't feel full for long. Your brain also takes into account chemical messengers in the form of hormones produced by endocrine cells throughout your digestive system. These respond to the presence of specific nutrients in your gut and bloodstream, which gradually increase as you digest your food. As the hormones seep out, they're swept up by the blood and eventually reach the hypothalamus in the brain. Over 20 gastrointestinal hormones are involved in moderating our appetites. One example is 𝐾𝐞𝐜𝐿, which is produced in response to food by cells in the upper small bowel. When it reached the hypothalamus, it causes a reduction in the feeling of reward you get when you eat food. When that occurs, the sense of being satiated starts to sink in and you stop eating.